Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
If you've ever driven across the Susquehanna River between Columbia and Wrightsville, you've probably seen them, there's this row of massive silent stone piers just sticking out of the water.
Yeah, they're just north of the current bridge, the Veterans Memorial.
Exactly. And they look almost like, like the giant teeth of some forgotten machine. They're so evenly spaced, but they're actually the ghost blueprint of a true 19th century engineering marvel.
Oh, and not just any marvel. We're talking about a structure whose history really has everything. I mean, it's got American ambition, commercial necessity, and then ultimately the brutal desperation of the Civil War.
Right. We are doing a deep dive today on the second Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge, this incredible covered wooden passage that was for a time the longest of its kind in the entire world.
It's an amazing story.
It is. And our sources for this deep dive detail the incredible life of this structure. It was so much more than just a road. It was, the main commercial artery for two whole counties, linking up rail lines, canal systems, everything. So our mission today is to really unpack the life of this massive machine, look at its frantic final day, June 28th, 1863, and then explore those chilling what-if scenarios.
That's the really fascinating part. What would have happened if Confederate troops had actually made it across that bridge and into Lancaster County?
It's a huge question.
It is. I mean, it's a moment in history where one very local, very tactical decision has these gigantic strategic ripple effects. To get why burning the world's longest covered bridge was even on the table, you have to understand the geography and the military situation in '63.
Okay, so let's set that scene. The Susquehanna River, especially this lower stretch, it's an enormous natural barrier. I mean, it's wide, it's fast-flowing, it's really hard to ford.
Right.
So when General Robert E. Lee launches his invasion of Pennsylvania in the summer of 1863, the Susquehanna basically becomes the definitive defensive line for the North.
The last line of defense.
Yeah.
If the Confederates breached that line, it meant a wide open path right into the northern industrial and agricultural heartland.
Game over.
Pretty much. The Union knew this. And because the river's so big, there were only 3 real crossings on that lower section that could handle an army. You had the Camelback Bridge up in Harrisburg,
right,
the Conowingo Bridge down in Maryland, and then right in the middle, this one, the Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge. That specific wooden structure, over a mile long, became the absolute vital bottleneck that the Union had to deny the enemy no matter what.
So the entire Gettysburg Campaign, in a very real sense, pivoted on this one wooden structure, its existence, and then its destruction.
Exactly.
What a story. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Section 1, the architecture of necessity. Because this wasn't even the first bridge at this spot. The history here is all about human need versus natural disaster.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a crucial precedent. The original Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge, built between 1812 and 1814, was already this immense project for a young country.
And expensive, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. It cost $231,000, which was an astounding sum back then. And it was huge, over 5,600 feet long, 30 feet wide, and it rested on 54 separate piers.
54. Wow.
And just like its successor, it held the title of the world's longest covered bridge when it was finished. They really tried to make it nice. It had twin carriageways, a whitewashed interior to make it brighter, even openings in the sides for a view of the river.
But it didn't last.
Not at all. Only 14 years. On February 5th, 1832, the river just reminded everyone who was boss. It was destroyed by a catastrophic event called an ice freshet.
An ice freshet. Okay, we should probably pause on that. What exactly is that? It sounds terrifying.
It is. It's essentially an inland tsunami.
Yeah.
You get rapidly melting snow and heavy spring rain, and it pushes these massive, thick sheets of winter ice downstream all at once.
So the ice just acts like a giant battering ram.
Exactly. And those 54 piers, well, that's 54 points of failure. They just couldn't stand up to that much pressure and current. The river basically swallowed the bridge whole.
But the crossing was too important to just give up on.
Absolutely. The Columbia Bank and Bridge Company knew they had to rebuild, and they had to do it fast, and more importantly, they had to learn from the disaster.
Which brings us to our bridge, the second marvel. Construction starts in mid-1832, just months after the first one was destroyed, and it opens on July 8th, 1834.
And the builders, James Moore and John Evans, they managed to improve the engineering in a huge way.
How so?
Well, you can see it in the numbers. The new bridge was a little shorter, about 5,620 feet, but it was wider 40 feet to handle more traffic.
Yeah.
But the really crucial change was structural. They cut the number of piers from 54 down to just 27.
They cut them in half. How is that even possible? How do you support a mile-long bridge with half the foundations?
That's the genius of it. They used what's called the Burr truss design. This is where the tech detail really matters. The Burr arch truss, which was patented by a guy named Theodore Burr, it combines the strength of a normal beam frame, your basic truss, with this massive, gently curving arch that runs underneath the main frame.
Okay, I think I can picture that.
So that arch distributes the enormous weight much more efficiently over the few piers that are left.
So instead of the weight pushing straight down on dozens of points, the bridge acts more like one continuous giant arch, which is inherently stronger.
Exactly. It made it way more resilient to the force of the current and, critically, the pressure from ice. It was the perfect engineering response to the disaster of 32.
And did it cost more?
Surprisingly, no. The cost was about $157,000, way less than the first one, partly because they were able to salvage a lot of the old oak timber from the wreckage.
That's incredible. So a better, stronger bridge for less money?
Mm-hmm. We're talking about an investment that today would be almost $5 million. I mean, just imagine building a 4-lane covered wooden tunnel a mile long across a river like the Susquehanna.
It's still staggering.
And it regained the title, the world's longest covered bridge. It had a shingled roof, weatherboard sides. It must have been an unforgettable experience to travel through it, inside that mile-long, whitewashed corridor, totally protected from the weather.
And it was all about commerce. The tolls show you how valuable it was. $1 for a wagon and 6 horses, that was a lot of money. 6 cents for a pedestrian. This thing was an economic engine.
And that detail about the tolls is important, right? Because it's why the bridge company fought so hard for compensation decades later, after it was destroyed.
Exactly. It was a private enterprise sacrificed for a public military good.
Okay, so let's shift a little. If the first section established the bridge as this architectural marvel, Section 2 shows us the bridge as a living, working machine, because it quickly became way more than just a road. That's right. To really get why the Union was willing to burn it down, you have to understand just how indispensable it had become. By 1840, only 6 years after it opened, they modified it to handle canal traffic.
Wait, canal traffic? On a wooden bridge? How on earth did that work?
They added 2 separate towpaths on the outside of the covered structure. It was the only way to link the Pennsylvania Canal on the Columbia side to the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal on the Wrightsville side.
So the canal boats themselves would cross the river.
Right, they'd cross the river in the open water, but the mules that pulled them needed a path, the towpaths. And the issue was safety. The original paths along the riverbank were dangerous, especially when the water was high.
So if the river's running fast, the mules pulling these heavy canal boats are just walking along the edge of a torrent.
Precisely. And our sources say that during high water, the current was so strong that several horses and mules actually slipped and were pulled into the river. It was a huge safety risk, not to mention a devastating loss for the canal operators.
So what was the solution?
Another incredible piece of engineering. The canal company paid $40,000, a huge sum, to build a 2-level towpath system on the bridge itself, complete with high sidewalls.
So they basically built walled-in walkways on the outside of the bridge.
They did. The lower path had a roof, and that roof was the floor for the upper path. It kept the animals and the handlers completely safe from the current. The bridge became a road, a pedestrian path, and a protected canal crossing all at once.
But it didn't stop there, because then the railroad arrived.
Mm-hmm. In the 1840s, the railroad came, and that just cemented the bridge's status as this indispensable choke point. Sometime after 1846, they installed a double-track railway right down the middle of the covered structure.
Linking what, the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad?
To the Northern Central Railway, yeah. If you wanted to move goods or people between Philadelphia and points south and west, you basically had to cross this bridge. It was the linchpin.
Okay, and this is where the historical irony really comes in. You have a mile-long, enclosed, dry, wooden tunnel.
And you're about to run a steam locomotive through it.
It's a guaranteed cataclysmic fire.
An existential risk. I mean, a fire was the single greatest threat to the whole structure,
Yeah.
and the engineers knew it. So the safety protocol was absolute, and pretty unique.
What was it?
Locomotives were strictly forbidden from crossing under their own power.
Get out! So how did they get across?
It's almost absurd to picture. You have this masterpiece of 19th century engineering moving the most modern rail traffic of the day using mules.
You're kidding.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The rail cars and even the locomotives themselves were pulled across by teams of horses or mules. It was slow, it was expensive, but it was the only way to avoid the risk of sparks.
So they would unhitch the locomotive, hook up a team of 10 or 12 mules, drag the engine a mile across the wooden tracks, and then rehitch it on the other side.
Every single time. This constant operational fear of fire, this pre-existing vulnerability, is the key ingredient that sets the stage for what happens in 1863.
Because when the time came, the men in charge of the bridge didn't have to guess how to burn it.
No. They knew from years of operating it that the structure was essentially, a prepackaged tinderbox. Cool. Just waiting for a spark.
Which brings us to the gathering storm. June 1863. The bridge is about to go from a machine of commerce to a machine of war.
Yep. General Robert E. Lee's push into Pennsylvania is in full swing. He's looking for supplies, trying to demoralize the North, and hoping to force a big battle somewhere other than his home turf in Virginia.
And by late June, the invasion is at its peak.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about 4 Confederate corps, over 70,000 men, spread across 4 different Pennsylvania counties, and Major General Jubal Early's division, that's almost 12,000 men, they capture the city of York on June 27th.
Then immediately demand a ransom.
Right, a massive one.
Yeah.
Supplies, food, money, shoes, you name it. But York wasn't the final prize. Early immediately sent Brigadier General John B. Gordon's veteran brigade eastward.
And their goal?
A very clear, very ambitious one. Cross the Susquehanna River. The orders were to seize Columbia, grab its resources, cut the Pennsylvania railroad lines, and then maybe march on the state capital at Harrisburg or even Philadelphia.
And suddenly the Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge is the absolute center of the universe for the Civil War's eastern flank.
It is. The river is the final barrier, and that mile-long wooden bridge is the one weak spot. If Gordon crosses, Lancaster County is wide open.
And the local people knew it?
Instantly. Wrightsville on the west bank became the epicenter of what they called the Great Exodus. Our sources describe just absolute chaos.
The roads leading to the bridge must have been a nightmare.
Totally clogged. Wagons, livestock, families, everyone was fleeing across that mile-long bridge into the safety of Columbia. The bridge company even dropped the tolls just to speed up the flow of refugees.
And we have to stop here and highlight the specific terror that African Americans were facing in this moment.
Yes, we do. The sources are very clear. Confederate forces were operating under standing orders to round up fugitive slaves. But they made no distinction. They were grabbing any black person they could find, regardless of whether they were legally free in Pennsylvania.
It was a campaign of enslavement. Hundreds of black Pennsylvanians were captured during this invasion.
So for them, the urgency was literal life or death. A Columbia resident, Annie Welsh, left this really poignant description of the refugees. She talked about the distressed mix of people, old and young, black and white, with all that they were able to move.
And this flight changed the region forever, didn't it?
It did. Many of the African Americans who fled that week never returned to their homes in York County. They feared, rightfully, that there would be more raids.
So while all this civilian chaos is happening, the military and the railroads are racing against the clock.
All the canal boats were pulled over to the Columbia side and anchored, but moving the locomotives. That was the real nightmare because of that fire protocol.
Right, the mules.
The logistical ingenuity here, under that kind of pressure, is just astounding. First, they had to physically dismantle the smokestacks just to get the engines to fit through the covered bridge.
Even then, they couldn't run on their own power?
Nope. This was the first time engines had ever crossed the bridge like this. They needed teams of 10, sometimes 12 mules to haul these heavy, stripped-down engines across the span one by one.
But they saved the rail stock.
They did. They got them to Columbia, coupled them to waiting trains, and pulled them to safety toward Philadelphia. While that was happening, the Union defense was being thrown together.
This is where Colonel Jacob Frick comes in.
Yes, the defense fell to Colonel Jacob G. Frick. He's a fascinating character. He'd actually been mustered out of service in May, but volunteered for emergency duty. He was commanding about 800 men of the 27th Pennsylvania Volunteer Militia.
A militia force. So not exactly battle-hardened veterans.
No, largely untested guys facing some of Lee's best troops. But Frick's force was bolstered by local volunteers, including a really critical company of 53 African-American men from Columbia who stayed to fight.
So his total force was, what, around 900 men?
About that. But here's the kicker. Frick was working with bad intel. He thought he was about to face 5,000 Confederates.
Oh, wow. So he's outnumbered more than 5-1 in his mind.
Exactly. So he knew his real mission wasn't to win a battle. It was to delay Gordon just long enough to get everyone across and then carry out the ultimate objective, destroy the bridge to save Lancaster County.
The fate of the whole eastern flank rested on that plan.
It did.
Okay, so we're moving from preparation to the moment of truth. The war arrives at the bridge, and the failure of one plan is about to force a much, much more brutal one.
Frick's defense, even with the bad intel, was pretty sound. He set up a crescent-shaped line west of Wrightsville, used barricades, lined up rail cars to stop a cavalry rush. Gordon, meanwhile, planned a classic pincer movement to flank him.
The Battle of Wrightsville. It wasn't very long, was it?
No, very brief. The first shots were fired on the afternoon of June 28th. The whole thing lasted about an hour and 15 minutes. As Gordon's pincer started to close in, Frick realized his position was hopeless. He'd be cut off and his men slaughtered.
So he gave the order to retreat across the bridge.
And that's the critical moment. Time for Plan A. The Union forces had planned a clean surgical strike. The idea was to just drop the fourth span, a 200-foot section from the Wrightsville side, into the river.
Create a gap, something that stops the army but can be repaired later.
Exactly. A team led by Robert Crane, a railroad superintendent, had prepped the span. They'd removed planks, sawed into timbers, bored holes, and packed them with gunpowder. An experienced blaster named John Denny was ready to light the fuses.
But it didn't work.
It failed, spectacularly. As Frick's last men got across, the fuses were lit. There was a huge roar, but Denny reported that the blast scarcely shook the bridge.
So what went wrong? Why did a carefully planned demolition of a wooden bridge just fizzle?
Well, there were a few likely reasons. First, they were in a hurry. They were preparing this under fire. Second, the powder was probably just low-grade blasting powder for quarry work. It's designed to push rock, not shatter timber.
And the bridge itself.
That bird truss design was engineered to resist massive, localized forces, like a huge ice flow hitting one pier. It's entirely possible that the inherent strength of the bridge just absorbed the blast without collapsing. It was damaged, sure, but still totally passable for troops.
The engineering that was meant to save it from the river ended up saving it from the army.
In a way, yes. So with Confederates surging toward the entrance and Plan A a total dud, Colonel Frick had only one choice left. He ordered the contingency plan.
Fire.
And they were ready for this.
They were. They had already saturated key sections of the bridge with crude oil and kerosene from a refinery in Columbia. This wasn't just a little bit. It was an enormous amount of accelerant.
John Denny and his men threw the torches. They did. And the conditions were perfect. You had dry, old timber, the enclosed design acting like a giant chimney, and a steady wind blowing from the east. The fire caught instantly and spread with terrifying speed.
And Gordon could do nothing but watch his objective go up in smoke.
Literally.
Yeah.
His men tried to put it out, but it was hopeless. They didn't have any firefighting equipment. They were an army on the march.
The whole bridge. How long did it take to burn?
The entire 5,600-foot structure burned completely in about 6 hours. The glow was immense. You could see it 10 miles away in Lancaster City. People in Gettysburg even saw the glow and thought the Confederates were burning York.
But the irony is the fire didn't stop at the bridge.
No, and this is where the story gets truly surreal. As this mile-long inferno raged, huge embers and sparks started raining down on the town of Wrightsville.
The town they had just captured.
The very same.
Yeah.
And it started to catch fire. So Gordon's Confederate soldiers are suddenly in this bizarre situation where they have to save the town they just invaded. They start demanding buckets from the locals.
And the locals, I read, initially said they'd all vanished.
They did. They'd hidden them. But when their own houses started to burn, the bucket suddenly reappeared.
So you have this surreal alliance. Confederate soldiers and Wrightsville citizens side by side.
Forming a bucket brigade to save the town from the fire their own side had started. In a way, it's just a fantastic image. They saved most of the town, though a few buildings were lost.
And on the Columbia side,
people were horrified. Annie Welsh called it a magnificent but awful sight. They tried to create a fire break by tearing up planks on their end, but the fire was just too intense. It only stopped when it reached the very last span, where the Columbia Fire Company could finally get enough water on it to put it out.
The mile-long wooden artery was gone. intentionally sacrifice.
And that sacrifice immediately changed the course of the Civil War in Pennsylvania.
So the immediate consequence of that fire was just strategic paralysis for the Confederates east of the river.
Total paralysis. Jubal Early himself later wrote that his goal of crossing into Lancaster County was entirely thwarted. It was a complete showstopper.
And the failure had immediate tactical effects. Gordon and Early were recalled to York on June 29th under direct orders from Lee to concentrate all forces near South Mountain.
Right. So destroying that one bridge forced an entire Confederate division, almost 12,000 men, to turn around and march west, wasting precious time and energy when every hour mattered.
And the timing of that is just. It's critical. 2 days later, July 1st, the Battle of Gettysburg begins.
Exactly. And Gordon's brigade, which had fought at Wrightsville and then spent hours fighting that huge town fire, arrived at Gettysburg exhausted. They suffered extremely heavy casualties on the first day, over 500 men. You have to wonder how much that exhaustion and delay played a role.
And what about the bridge company?
Commercially, the loss was staggering. The Columbia Bank and Bridge Company sued the federal government for reimbursement. The damage was estimated at what would be over $170 million today.
And did they get it?
They never got a penny. The government ruled it was a necessary military sacrifice executed by Union forces. End of story.
Which brings us, of course, to the great what if, the speculation that still hangs over this whole event.
Right. Early and Gordon's plans were explicit. They were going to cross that bridge, cut the Pennsylvania Railroad, seize supplies in Columbia, and then push on.
So let's really get into it. What if the demolition failed, but Frick didn't order the fire? What if the bridge had stayed intact for just a few more hours?
If that had happened, Gordon's aggressive brigade would have poured across the river into Columbia instantly, and the ripple effects would have been catastrophic for the Union.
First, Lancaster County itself, a rich agricultural area, a major source of Union supplies.
It would have immediately become a major front line. You'd have thousands of Confederate troops moving deep into the county, seizing horses, cattle, food, everything Lee's army needed to sustain its campaign.
And the panic. Imagine the panic. You've suddenly got 12,000 Confederates operating 70 miles east of where the main armies are supposed to be gathering.
The Union command would have had to react. They would have been forced to divert troops and resources away from Gettysburg to deal with this massive threat in their rear.
And the railroad.
Cutting the Pennsylvania Railroad would have been guaranteed. That was the main line linking the East Coast to the Midwest. It would have severely hampered the Union's ability to move troops and supplies toward the battle. That disruption alone could have changed everything.
And what about Lee's plans? How would this success have changed his strategy?
That's maybe the biggest what if. If Early and Gordon had succeeded, if they had a secure crossing and were raiding deep into the northern heartland, Lee might have altered his whole plan. Maybe he delays his concentration, thinking he has a huge advantage in the east.
So instead of one big, concentrated fight at Gettysburg,
the Union might have been forced into a much more scattered defense. Maybe failing to get their own forces concentrated effectively on July 1st. Burning that bridge simplified the military math for the Union. It turned the Susquehanna back into a barrier, forced the rebels to retreat, and it ensured the decisive battle happened right where and when it did.
So a failure of engineering the dynamite led to a desperate choice that became a massive strategic victory.
It's a perfect example. The immediate tactical choice of fire paid off with a huge strategic win for the North.
And the fact that they just kept rebuilding bridges in that exact spot tells you everything you need to know about how vital that crossing was.
Oh, absolutely. The story doesn't end in 1863. The railroad bought the rights and immediately started planning the third bridge.
Which was built in 1868, another covered bridge, but they learned a lesson from the fire, didn't they?
They did. They spent $400,000 on it, and recognizing how vulnerable a mile of wood was, they built 2 wrought iron truss spans right in the middle.
As fire breaks.
Explicitly as fire breaks. So if a fire started, they hoped to keep it from taking the whole structure.
Brilliant. But fire wasn't the enemy that time?
Nope. The third bridge was completely destroyed by the 1896 Cedar Keys hurricane. The river always gets the last word.
So they built a fourth one, the Iron Bridge, in 1897.
And they built it fast, on the exact same 27 stone piers from the 1834 bridge. It was all steel, designed to resist fire, ice, and wind.
And that one lasted until 1964?
Yep. Carried rail traffic until 58. And then, of course, you get the bridges we know today. The fifth one is the Veterans Memorial Bridge, Route 462, finished in 1930 for cars.
Which is, I believe, the world's longest concrete, multiple arch bridge.
It is. And then the sixth crossing is the modern Route 30 bridge, the Wrights Ferry Bridge, built a little north in 1972 for the expressway traffic.
But if you want to see the real story, you go back to those piers.
You go back to the 27 stone piers.
Yeah.
Standing there in the water. They date back to the 1834 Burr Truss structure that Colonel Frick torched.
They're the tangible, permanent reminder of the longest covered bridge in the world and its role in history. You can see them perfectly from the Columbia Crossing River Trails Center. It's the exact spot where commerce, engineering, and the fate of the Civil War all collided.
So looking back, our deep dive has really been about the life and the death of this one colossal piece of infrastructure. We saw a mile-long commercial lifeline.
A machine that carried everything from canal boats to dismembered locomotives.
Right. Turned into a deliberate sacrificial fire break.
And I think the key takeaway for you, the learner, is how these massive history-altering decisions are so often born from desperation, from the failure of Plan A. The elegant surgical use of dynamite failed, probably because the bridge was just too damn strong.
So that failure forced Plan B, the total irreversible destruction by fire.
Yep.
And that blunt, scorched earth choice is what saved Lancaster County from invasion and helped shape the events that led to Gettysburg.
But the cost was immense. The bridge company wanted what would be $170 million today, and the local reaction was complicated too.
It was. While some people in Columbia were obviously relieved the rebels were stopped, others were just frustrated. They saw it as an unnecessary tragedy.
We have sources that suggest many locals, watching their main economic artery burn to the ground, actually felt they would have rather seen Confederates in town for a few days than lose their vital connection to the world forever.
Which is an incredible perspective.
It is, and it raises a powerful question for you to think about. In a world where strategic sacrifice is sometimes necessary for a larger goal, what price tag do you put on a piece of critical daily use infrastructure versus the cost of occupation? Was the $170 million loss worth it to ensure Lee's forces had to fight west of the Susquehanna? That's something to mull over the next time you cross those quiet waters.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.